The rain was falling hard on Interstate 40 that November night, the kind of rain that makes you question every decision you've ever made about becoming a long-haul trucker. Marcus Johnson had been driving for 16 hours straight, his eyes burning from the strain of peering through the sheets of water cascading down his windshield. The wipers were working overtime, and still he could barely see 20 feet ahead of his 18-wheeler. He was 53 years old, with hands that had gripped steering wheels for more than 3 decades. His face was weathered, lined with the stories of 1,000 highways and 10,000 truck stops. His hair had turned grey at the temples, and his brown eyes carried the weight of miles that most people couldn't even imagine. Marcus had started this life young, right out of high school in Memphis, Tennessee. His father had been a trucker before him, and his grandfather before that. It was in his blood, they always said. The open road, the hum of the engine, the solitude that came with being alone with your thoughts for days at a time. But tonight, as the rain hammered against his cab, Marcus wasn't thinking about family legacy or the romance of the road. He was thinking about the phone call he'd received 3 days ago. His daughter Jessica had called to tell him that his ex-wife Linda had passed away. Cancer. She'd been fighting it for 2 years, and he hadn't even known. They'd been divorced for 15 years. She'd remarried, moved to California, started a new life. But still, learning about her death had opened something inside him that he'd kept locked away for a very long time. Regret, maybe, or something deeper. The truck stop appeared through the rain like a beacon of yellow light in the darkness. Marcus pulled his rig off the highway, the air brakes hissing as he brought the massive vehicle to a stop. He needed coffee. He needed to stretch his legs. He needed to stop thinking about things he couldn't change. The parking lot was crowded with other trucks, their drivers seeking the same refuge from the storm. Marcus climbed down from his cab, his boots splashing in the puddles that had formed on the cracked asphalt. He pulled his jacket collar up against the rain and jogged toward the entrance of the diner. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of bacon grease and fresh coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a slightly yellow glow. A few other truckers sat at the counter, hunched over their plates, not talking to anyone. That was the code out here. You respected a man's silence. Marcus slid into a booth near the window and ordered a cup of black coffee from the waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Dolores. She brought him his coffee without a word, sensing that he wasn't in the mood for small talk. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug and stared out the window at the rain. His phone sat on the table in front of him, and he found himself scrolling through old photos. There was one of Jessica as a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, sitting on his shoulders at a county fair. She was laughing, her arms spread wide like she was trying to fly. That was before the divorce, before he'd chosen the road over his family, before he'd let everything that mattered slip through his fingers like sand. His phone buzzed with a text message from his dispatcher. Load ready in Albuquerque. Pick up tomorrow morning. Deliver to Phoenix by Friday. Marcus typed back a quick confirmation and finished his coffee. He was about to head back to his truck when he noticed a woman standing near the entrance of the diner. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair that was plastered to her face from the rain. She was holding something against her chest, wrapped in a blanket. A baby. She was holding a baby. She looked lost, her eyes scanning the diner like she was searching for something or someone. Her clothes were soaked through and she was shivering. Marcus watched as Dolores approached her and said something he couldn't hear. The young woman shook her head and backed away slightly, like a wounded animal that didn't trust anyone. Marcus turned back to his coffee, telling himself it wasn't his business. People had their own problems, their own stories. You couldn't save everyone, and trying to would only break you. But he couldn't stop glancing over at her. She'd moved to a corner of the diner now, near the restrooms, still clutching the baby. She wasn't ordering anything, wasn't sitting down, just standing there, looking like she might collapse at any moment. Finally, against his better judgment, Marcus stood up and walked over to her. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "are you all right? Can I help you with something?" She looked up at him with eyes that were red from crying. Up close, he could see that she was even younger than he'd thought, maybe 25 at most, and she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the word. "No offense, but you don't look fine," Marcus said. "Why don't you come sit down, get something warm to eat, on me?" She hesitated, looking at him with a mixture of suspicion and hope. The baby in her arms stirred and made a small sound, and she shifted her weight to rock it gently. "I can't pay you back," she said. "I'm not asking you to." Something in his voice must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly and followed him to his booth. Dolores appeared immediately, her eyes soft with concern, as she looked at the young woman. "What can I get you, honey?" Dolores asked. "Just some water, please, and maybe some crackers if you have them." "You need more than that," Marcus said. "Get her whatever she wants, and some soup, something warm." Dolores nodded and hurried off to the kitchen. The young woman sat across from Marcus, still holding the baby close. Now that they were in better light, he could see that the baby was very small, newborn small. "How old?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the bundle in her arms. 12 days, she said. "Boy or girl?" "Boy. His name is Daniel." "That's a good name. Strong name." She didn't respond, just looked down at her son with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. There was love there, certainly, but also something else. Fear, maybe, or sadness. "I'm Marcus," he said. "Eleanor," she replied. Dolores brought over a bowl of chicken soup and a basket of crackers. Elena ate slowly at first, like she'd forgotten what food tasted like, then faster as her hunger took over. Marcus sat quietly, giving her space, not pushing for answers to the questions that were piling up in his mind. When she'd finished the soup, she leaned back against the booth and closed her eyes for a moment. The baby, Daniel, was sleeping peacefully against her chest. "Thank you," Elena said. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't, but I wanted to." She opened her eyes and studied him. "You're a trucker?" "Going on 30 years now. Long time. Too long, some would say. My ex-wife definitely said it, many times." A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's face. "My father was a trucker before he died." "I'm sorry to hear that. It was a long time ago. I was 12. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain against the windows and the low murmur of conversation from the other patrons. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Sure." "Where are you headed?" "Albuquerque tonight, then Phoenix after that." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Phoenix? Yeah, why?" She looked down at her baby, and when she looked back up, there were tears forming in her eyes. "That's where I need to go. Phoenix." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd been doing this job for 30 years, and he'd learned to trust his instincts. Right now, his instincts were telling him that this young woman was carrying a burden far heavier than the baby in her arms. "What's in Phoenix?" he asked gently. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My mother. She's there. She's dying. Cancer. The doctors say she only has a few weeks left, maybe less." The word cancer hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His ex-wife, the phone call, the regret he'd been trying to outrun. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it more than she could know. "I've been trying to get there for 3 days," Elena continued, her voice trembling. "I was supposed to fly, but I couldn't afford the ticket. Then I tried to take a bus, but they wouldn't let me board with the baby because I didn't have his birth certificate. Some problem with the paperwork at the hospital. They said it would take weeks to fix. She took a shaky breath. So I started hitchhiking. I know it sounds crazy, especially with a newborn, but I don't have a car. I don't have anyone to help me. And my mother, she's never even seen Daniel. She's never held her grandson. Her voice broke completely on the last word, and she pressed her face against the baby's blanket to muffle her sobs. Marcus sat there, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He thought about Linda, dying alone in California while he drove his truck across the country, oblivious. He thought about all the chances he'd had to make things right, all the phone calls he'd never made, all the apologies he'd never offered. "Where did you start from?" he asked. "Oklahoma City, a shelter there. I've been moving from shelter to shelter for the past few months, ever since—" She trailed off, and Marcus didn't push. "That's about 600 miles to Phoenix," he said. "You've been hitchhiking with a 12-day-old baby in November." "I know how it sounds. I know what kind of person that makes me seem like, but you don't understand. My mother is dying. She's never met my son. And she asked me, she begged me to bring him to her before she goes. That's her last wish, her only wish. To hold her grandson, just once." She looked at Marcus with desperation in her eyes. "I have to get there. I don't care what it takes. I'll walk if I have to." Marcus thought about company policy. He thought about insurance regulations and liability issues. He thought about all the reasons why giving a ride to a stranger with a newborn baby was a terrible idea that could cost him his job. And then he thought about Linda, about Jessica, about all the things he should have done differently. "Albuquerque to Phoenix is about 6 hours, give or take," he said slowly. "I'm picking up a load tomorrow morning, supposed to deliver it by Friday." Elena's face fell. "Oh, I understand. You have a schedule. It's okay. Thank you for the food." "Let me finish," Marcus said. "I could make a detour to Phoenix first, drop you off, then head back to pick up my load. It would mean some extra driving, but I can make up the time." Elena stared at him. "What? No. I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering." "But why? You don't even know me." Marcus thought about that question for a moment. Why was he doing this? What was it about this young woman and her baby that had stirred something inside him? "Because I've spent 30 years on these roads," he said finally, "and in all that time, I've learned one thing for certain. When you have a chance to help someone, really help them, you take it. Because that chance might not come again." He paused, looking out the window at the rain. "And because I know what it feels like to miss your chance to say goodbye to someone you love. I don't want that for you." Elena was crying again, but this time the tears seemed different. Like relief, maybe. Like hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. We've got a long drive ahead of us, and you're going to need to get some sleep. When's the last time you really slept?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know. Days, maybe. I've been too afraid to sleep, afraid someone would try to take Daniel while I wasn't watching. Well, you can sleep in my truck. I've got a bunk in the back. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry, and I promise you, nobody's going to bother you or your baby while I'm around." They left the diner an hour later, after Eleanor had fed Daniel and changed his diaper in the restroom. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Marcus helped Elena climb up into the cab of his truck, holding Daniel while she got settled. The interior of the cab was cleaner than she'd expected. Marcus had told her he'd been married to the road for 30 years, and she'd expected it to look like a bachelor's apartment. But there were no fast food wrappers or dirty clothes strewn about, just a small photo taped to the dashboard, a young girl with a big smile. "Your daughter?" Eleanor asked. Marcus glanced at the photo. "Yeah, Jessica. She's grown now, has kids of her own. Do you see her often?" Not as often as I should. He started the engine, and the truck rumbled to life. The cab vibrated with the familiar rhythm of the diesel engine, a sound that Marcus had come to associate with home. "Get some rest," he said. "There's blankets in the back. I'll drive through the night, and we should be in Phoenix by tomorrow evening." Eleanor climbed into the sleeper berth behind the seats, still holding Daniel close. She lay down on the narrow mattress and pulled the blanket over both of them. Within minutes, she was asleep. Marcus drove in silence, listening to the soft breathing of the woman and child behind him. The rain had stopped completely now, and the sky was beginning to clear. Stars appeared one by one, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. He thought about his own life, about the choices he'd made. He'd always told himself that being a trucker was noble work, that someone had to keep the country moving, keep the shelves stocked, and the economy running. And that was true, as far as it went. But it was also true that he'd used the road as an escape. When things got hard with Linda, when the arguments became too much, he'd volunteer for longer hauls. When Jessica started asking questions about why he was never home, he'd hide behind his work schedule. He'd been a coward, plain and simple. And by the time he realized it, it was too late to fix anything. The highway stretched out before him, an endless ribbon of asphalt illuminated by his headlights. He drove west, toward Albuquerque, toward Phoenix, toward a dying woman he'd never met, but somehow felt connected to, because grief recognizes grief, and second chances, when they come, don't always look the way you expect them to. The sun was rising over the New Mexico desert when Elena woke up. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before remembering where she was. The truck was still moving, the engine humming steadily. Daniel was asleep beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She sat up slowly and climbed back into the passenger seat. Marcus glanced over at her and smiled. "Morning? How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Elena admitted. "I can't remember the last time I slept more than a couple hours at a stretch." "Having a newborn will do that to you. It's not just that, it's everything." She looked out the window at the desert landscape rolling by. The sun was painting the distant mesas in shades of orange and pink, and the air had a clarity that she'd never seen before. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yeah, this stretch always gets me. I've driven it hundreds of times, but it never gets old." They passed a sign that read, "Albuquerque, 50 miles." Marcus had been driving all night, and Elena felt a sudden surge of guilt. "You must be exhausted," she said. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'm fine. I'll grab a few hours once we get you settled in Phoenix." "That's crazy. You've been driving all night. You need to rest." "I've done longer hauls than this. Trust me, I know my limits." Elena shook her head, marveling at this stranger's kindness. In her experience, people didn't do things like this without expecting something in return. But Marcus seemed different. He seemed genuine. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Depends on what it is." "Your daughter, Jessica. You said you don't see her as often as you should. Why not?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, keeping his eyes on the road. "Because I made a lot of mistakes when she was growing up. I was gone most of the time, and when I was home, I wasn't really present. I was always thinking about the next haul, the next delivery. Her mother and I divorced when she was 10, and after that, I don't know. It just got harder and harder to stay connected." "But you're still in touch?" "Yeah. We talk on the phone sometimes. She texts me pictures of her kids. She invited me to Christmas last year." "Did you go?" "No. I took a load to Seattle instead. Told myself I needed the money." Elena nodded slowly. She understood the art of telling yourself stories to avoid the things you were afraid of. "It's not too late," she said. "To be in her life, I mean. It's never too late for that." Marcus glanced at her. "That's kind of why I'm driving you to Phoenix. I keep thinking about what it would be like if Jessica needed to see me before I died and something got in her way. I'd want someone to help her. Is that the only reason? No, he admitted. My ex-wife just passed away a few days ago. Cancer. Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. We were divorced for 15 years. I didn't even know she was sick. She never told me, and I never asked. I checked out of that whole part of my life. Elena reached over and put her hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to Marcus than she could know. My mother and I were estranged for years, too, Elena said. After my father died, she kind of fell apart. Started drinking. Made a lot of bad decisions. I was so angry at her for so long. What changed? I got pregnant and suddenly I understood things I never understood before, about fear, about loneliness, about how easy it is to lose yourself when you don't have anyone to hold on to. She looked down at her hands. I reached out to her about 6 months ago. We talked on the phone for hours, cried a lot. She apologized for everything, and I apologized for shutting her out. It was like a weight lifted off both of us. That's beautiful, Marcus said, and then she told me she was sick, that the cancer had come back and this time it was terminal. She only had a few months left. Elena's voice cracked, but she pushed through. I promised her I would come see her, that I would bring the baby when he was born so she could meet her grandson. That was the thing that kept her going through the pregnancy, knowing that she would get to hold him. And now you're almost there, Marcus said, because of you. Because a complete stranger in a truck stop decided to help me for no reason at all. There's always a reason, Marcus said, even if we don't understand it at the time. They stopped for breakfast at a small diner just outside Albuquerque. Daniel had woken up and was fussing, so Eleanor fed him while Marcus ordered eggs and bacon for both of them. The waitress cooed over the baby, commenting on how tiny he was. 12 days old, Eleanor said proudly. His name is Daniel. What a sweet angel, the waitress said. Are you two his grandparents? Elena and Marcus exchanged a glance and both laughed. No, Marcus said, just friends. New friends, Elena added. We met last night. The waitress looked confused but didn't press the issue. She brought their food and left them alone. So tell me about Daniel's father, Marcus said as they ate, if you don't mind my asking. Elena's face tightened slightly. There's not much to tell. His name was Ryan. We were together for 2 years. I thought we were going to get married, have a family, the whole thing. What happened? He didn't want to be a father. When I told him I was pregnant, he told me to get rid of it. When I said no, he left. Haven't heard from him since. Marcus shook his head. I'm sorry. That's a hard thing. It's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but I've made peace with it. Daniel doesn't need a father who doesn't want him. He's better off without someone like that in his life. You're a strong woman, Elena. I hope you know that. I don't feel strong. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's what strong looks like, most of the time. It's not about feeling invincible. It's about keeping going even when you feel like you can't. They finished their breakfast and got back on the road. The desert landscape gave way to mountains as they climbed toward the Arizona border. Daniel slept in a makeshift car seat that they'd fashioned from blankets and a cardboard box, secured as safely as they could manage. I wish I had a real car seat for him, Elena said, watching her son anxiously. We'll get you one in Phoenix, Marcus said. There's got to be a store or something. I don't have money for that. I do. Don't argue with me about it. Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Why are you being so kind to me, Marcus? Really? What's in it for you? Marcus thought about the question. You know, I've been asking myself the same thing, and I think the answer is that there's nothing in it for me, at least not in the way you mean. But maybe that's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is that I've spent 30 years living for myself, driving my routes, collecting my paychecks, keeping my head down. And in all that time, I never really helped anyone. Not my wife, not my daughter, not anyone. He paused, gripping the steering wheel. I don't want to die like that, Elena. I don't want to reach the end of my life and realize that I never made a difference to anyone, that I was just passing through. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You're making a difference now. To me, to Daniel, to my mother, even though she doesn't know it yet. I hope so." They crossed into Arizona just after noon. The landscape changed again, becoming drier and more sparse. Cacti dotted the hillsides, and the sky was an impossibly deep blue. Elena called her mother from Marcus's phone. The conversation was brief, just long enough to say that she was on her way, that she would be there by evening. Marcus could hear the frail voice on the other end of the line, filled with emotion. When Elena hung up, she was crying again. "She sounds so weak," Elena said. "The last time I talked to her 2 weeks ago, she was still able to sit up and walk around a little. Now she can barely talk." "She's holding on for you," Marcus said, "for Daniel. I know, that's what scares me. What if we don't make it in time? What if she—" "Don't think like that. We're going to get there, I promise you." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The road was long, and there were no guarantees in life. He'd learned that the hard way. They stopped for gas in Flagstaff, and Marcus stretched his legs while the tank filled. His body was aching from the long hours behind the wheel, and his eyes felt gritty with fatigue, but he pushed the exhaustion aside. There would be time to rest later. Elena came out of the gas station with a bottle of water and some snacks. She looked worried. "Marcus, you need to sleep. You've been driving for almost 20 hours. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted. I can see it." "Eleanor, we're 3 hours from Phoenix. Your mother is waiting. I can sleep when we get there." She shook her head. "No, I mean it. If you crash this truck, we all die. Me, Daniel, you. I'm not going to let that happen." Marcus wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. His reaction time was slower than it should be, and his thoughts were getting foggy. "Okay," he said, "but just for an hour. We can't afford more than that." He pulled the truck into a rest area a few miles down the highway. There were other trucks parked there, their drivers catching some sleep before continuing their journeys. Marcus climbed into the sleeper berth and was asleep within seconds. Elena sat in the passenger seat, holding Daniel and watching the desert through the window. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. She thought about her mother, alone, in a hospice in Phoenix. She thought about all the years they'd wasted being angry at each other, all the conversations they'd never had. She thought about the fact that her mother might die without ever holding her grandson. And she made a promise to herself, right there in that truck, she would not let that happen, no matter what it took. Marcus woke up exactly 1 hour later, as if his internal clock was still running even in sleep. He climbed back into the driver's seat, looking more alert but still tired. "Feel better?" Elena asked. "A little. Let's go." They pulled back onto the highway and continued south toward Phoenix. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Elena had never seen a sunset like this before, so vivid and dramatic. "My father used to tell me that sunsets were God's way of saying goodbye to the day," she said softly. "That's beautiful. He was a beautiful man, gentle, kind, a lot like you, actually." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just drove. They reached the outskirts of Phoenix as the last light faded from the sky. The city spread out before them, a sea of lights against the dark desert. Elena was on the phone with the hospice, getting directions. "It's on the east side," she said. "About 20 minutes from here." Marcus navigated through the city traffic, following Elena's directions. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his heart was racing. He felt invested in this now, in a way he hadn't expected. He needed this to work out. He needed Elena to get her goodbye. The hospice was a low, modern building surrounded by desert landscaping. Marcus pulled the truck into the parking lot, finding a spot near the entrance. "This is it," Elena said, her voice trembling. "You ready?" "No, but I'm going anyway." She gathered Daniel into her arms, wrapping him tightly in his blanket. Then she turned to Marcus with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You've changed my life. You've changed everything." "Just go see your mother," Marcus said. "That's all the thanks I need." Elena reached out and hugged him, an awkward embrace across the truck's center console. Marcus hugged her back, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. "Will you wait for me?" Elena asked. "Just for a little while?" "I'll be here," Marcus said. He watched her walk toward the hospice entrance, a small figure carrying an even smaller bundle. Just before she went inside, she turned and waved. Marcus waved back. Then he was alone. He sat in his truck, staring at the hospice building. The lights in the windows glowed warm against the night sky. Somewhere in there, a woman was about to meet her grandson for the first time, and possibly the last. Marcus thought about his own mother, who had died when he was in his 20s. He'd been on the road when it happened, too far away to make it back in time. He'd always regretted that, always wished he could have been there to say goodbye. Maybe that was why he'd stopped for Elena at that truck stop. Maybe something inside him recognized a chance to make up for old mistakes, even if the circumstances were different. His phone buzzed with a text from his dispatcher. "Where are you? Load in Albuquerque is waiting." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Delayed, personal emergency, will be there tomorrow." The dispatcher's response was immediate. "This is unacceptable. We have a schedule to maintain." Marcus typed back, "Fire me if you want. I'll be there when I can." He turned off his phone and leaned back in his seat. For the first time in 30 years, he didn't care about the schedule. He didn't care about the load. He didn't care about anything except the young woman inside that hospice, trying to give her mother one last moment of happiness. About an hour later, Eleanor emerged from the building. Even from across the parking lot, Marcus could see that she'd been crying. But there was something else in her face too, something like peace. She climbed back into the truck and sat there for a moment, not saying anything. "How is she?" Marcus asked gently. She's dying, but she's happy." "Marcus, you should have seen her face when I put Daniel in her arms. It was like everything in her life had been leading to that moment." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She held him for almost an hour, just held him and looked at him. She said he looked just like my father, same eyes, same chin. "That's wonderful, Elena. She wants to meet you." Marcus blinked. "Me? Why?" "I told her about you, about what you did for us. She said she wants to thank the man who brought her grandson to her." "I don't know, Elena. That seems like a family moment. I wouldn't want to intrude." "Please, Marcus. It would mean so much to her, to both of us." Marcus hesitated. He'd never been comfortable with gratitude, never knew how to accept it gracefully, but something in Elena's eyes told him this was important. "Okay," he said, "if you're sure." They walked into the hospice together, Elena carrying Daniel. The interior was quiet and peaceful, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. A nurse greeted them at the front desk and led them down a hallway to a private room. Elena's mother was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. She was thin, so thin that she almost disappeared into the white sheets, but her eyes were bright and alert, and she smiled when she saw them enter. "Mama," Elena said, "this is Marcus, the man I told you about." Marcus stepped forward, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place. "Hello, ma'am. It's an honor to meet you." The woman reached out a trembling hand and Marcus took it gently. Her skin was paper-thin and cool to the touch. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my daughter to me, for bringing my grandson." "It was my pleasure, ma'am. Elena tells me you're a trucker. 30 years on the road." "Yes, ma'am. That's a hard life, a lonely life." "It can be." The woman studied him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "But you stopped for a stranger, in a truck stop, in the middle of the night. Why?" Marcus thought about the question. He'd been asking himself the same thing for the past 24 hours. "Because I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," he said finally, "and I guess I saw a chance to do something right for once." The woman nodded slowly. "I've made mistakes too, many of them. I wasn't a good mother to Elena. I let her down when she needed me most." She paused, gathering her strength. "But God gives us second chances, if we're willing to take them. You took yours when you helped my daughter. I took mine when I called her and asked for forgiveness." She squeezed Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Don't waste your second chance, Marcus. Go see your daughter. Tell her you love her. Be the father you should have been." Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. He blinked them back, but a few escaped anyway. "I will," he said. "I promise." Elena put Daniel in her mother's arms again, and the old woman's face transformed with joy. She looked down at the tiny baby with an expression of pure love. "He's perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." They stayed for another hour, talking quietly and watching the baby sleep in his grandmother's arms. Marcus learned that the woman's name was Rosa, that she'd been born in Mexico but had lived in the United States since she was a teenager. She'd worked as a seamstress for most of her life, making wedding dresses and quinceañera gowns. "I made Elena's first communion dress," Rosa said proudly. "White silk with lace trim. She looked like an angel." "Mama," Elena said, embarrassed but pleased. "It's true. You were the most beautiful girl in the whole church. Your father was so proud." As the hour grew late, Rosa's energy began to fade. Her eyes grew heavy, and her words came slower. "You should rest, Mama," Elena said. "I know, but I don't want to close my eyes. I'm afraid that if I do, I won't open them again." "Don't talk like that." "It's the truth, Mija. We both know it." Rosa looked at Marcus. "Will you take care of her? After I'm gone?" Marcus was startled by the question. "Ma'am, I know you just met her. I know it's a lot to ask. But she has no one else. Her father is dead. She has no siblings, and Daniel's father—" Rosa's face darkened with anger. "That man is not worth mentioning." "Mama, please," Elena said. "Marcus has his own life, his own family." "A family he's been neglecting," Rosa said bluntly. "He told me so himself." Marcus couldn't argue with that. "I'll do what I can, ma'am, I promise." Rosa nodded, satisfied. Then she turned to Elena and cupped her face in her hands. "I love you, Mija. I always have, even when I didn't know how to show it. You are the best thing I ever did in my life, you and this beautiful baby." Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too, Mama. I'm so sorry for everything." "There's nothing to be sorry for. We found our way back to each other. That's all that matters." Rosa kissed her daughter's forehead, then turned to Daniel. She kissed him too on his tiny head. "Be good to your mama," she whispered. "She's going to need you." They left the hospice a few minutes later, after Rosa had fallen asleep. The nurse assured them that she would call immediately if there were any changes. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Stars filled the sky, more stars than Marcus had ever seen in the city. "What now?" he asked Eleanor. "I don't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I was so focused on getting here, on seeing my mother. I didn't think about what comes next." Do you have a place to stay? Elena shook her head. I was going to figure something out. There must be a shelter or something. No, Marcus said firmly. You're not going to a shelter, not with a 12-day-old baby. I don't have any other options, Marcus. Yes, you do. You're staying with me. Elena stared at him. What? There's a motel down the road. I'll get us rooms. You and Daniel can sleep in a real bed, get cleaned up, have a proper meal. In the morning, we'll figure out the next steps. Marcus, I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering, same as before. Elena looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Why? Why are you doing all this? Marcus thought about Rosa's words, about second chances and not wasting them. Because I spent 30 years running away from things, he said, from my wife, from my daughter, from anything that felt too hard or too real. And now my wife is dead, and my daughter is a stranger, and I'm 53 years old with nothing to show for my life except a truck and a whole lot of miles. He paused, looking up at the stars. Your mother asked me to take care of you, and maybe that's crazy. Maybe it doesn't make any sense, but for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. I feel like I'm actually living, instead of just passing through. Elena reached out and took his hand. You're a good man, Marcus Johnson, better than you know. They found a motel a few miles from the hospice. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and quiet. Marcus got 2 rooms side by side, one for Elena and Daniel, one for himself. Try to get some sleep, he told her. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. What about you? You must be exhausted. I am. But I've got some phone calls to make first. Elena nodded and went into her room, carrying Daniel carefully. Marcus watched her go, then went to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. There were a dozen messages from his dispatcher, each one angrier than the last. He ignored them all. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he was looking for, Jessica Johnson. His finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. It was late, almost 11 o'clock. She was probably asleep. He should wait until morning. But Rosa's voice echoed in his head. Don't waste your second chance. He pressed the button. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Dad? Is everything okay? Hey, Jess. I'm sorry to call so late. No, it's fine. What's going on? You never call at this time. Marcus took a deep breath. I wanted to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. Okay. I'm sorry for not being there when you were growing up. For missing your birthdays and your school plays and all those moments that I can never get back. I'm sorry for choosing the road over you, over and over again, and I'm sorry for using my job as an excuse to avoid the hard stuff. There was silence on the other end of the line. Marcus pressed on. I know I can't make up for lost time. I know I can't fix what's broken between us. But I want you to know that I love you, Jess. I've always loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it. More silence. Then a small voice. Dad, are you okay? Did something happen? Yeah, something happened. I helped someone tonight. A young woman, not much older than you. She was trying to get to Phoenix to see her dying mother, and I gave her a ride. And while I was doing that, I realized something. What? That life is short, that the things we put off, the words we don't say, the people we don't show up for, they add up. And before you know it, it's too late. He heard Jessica sniffle on the other end of the line. I've been wanting you to say something like this for so long, Dad. So long. I know, sweetheart, I'm sorry it took me so long. Are you coming home? For Christmas, I mean. You said you couldn't last year, but... Yes, Marcus said. I'm coming home for Christmas. I'm going to take some time off work. A lot of time, actually. And I want to spend it with you and the kids, if you'll have me. Of course I'll have you, Dad. You're my father. You're always welcome. They talked for another hour, about nothing in particular and everything at once. Jessica told him about her kids, about her job as a nurse, about her husband who was a good man who treated her well. Marcus told her about his life on the road, about the loneliness and the sunsets and the strange beauty of driving through the night. And when they finally said goodbye, both of them were crying. Marcus lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He felt lighter than he had in years, like some heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Tomorrow he would call his dispatcher and explain everything. He might lose his job, but that didn't seem as important as it once had. There were other trucking companies. There were other loads to haul. But there was only one daughter, only one chance to make things right. He fell asleep with the phone still in his hand. The next few days passed in a blur. Marcus stayed in Phoenix, reluctant to leave Elena and Daniel alone. He called his dispatcher and explained the situation, and to his surprise, the man was more understanding than Marcus had expected. "Take the time you need," the dispatcher said. "Family comes first. The load can wait." Family. It was a strange word to use for people Marcus had just met, but that's what they felt like somehow. Family. He spent his days at the hospice, sitting with Elena while she visited her mother. Rosa was declining rapidly now, sleeping most of the time and barely able to speak when she was awake. But she always smiled when she saw Daniel, always reached out her thin arms to hold him. On the third day, Marcus was sitting in the hospice waiting room when his phone rang. It was Jessica. "Dad, where are you?" "Phoenix. Still." "What? Why? I thought you were just dropping someone off." Marcus explained the situation, about Elena and her mother, about the promise he'd made to Rosa. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like something Grandpa would have done." Marcus's father had died 15 years ago, but the comparison hit home. His father had been a trucker too, but he'd always found time for family. He'd been at every birthday, every holiday, every important moment. He'd somehow balanced the road and his responsibilities in a way that Marcus had never managed. "I'm trying to be more like him," Marcus said. "I know you are, Dad. And I'm proud of you." That afternoon, Rosa took a turn for the worse. The nurses called Elena to the room, and she rushed in with Daniel in her arms. Marcus waited outside, pacing the hallway. An hour later, Elena emerged. Her face was tear-stained but calm. "She's gone," Elena said quietly. Marcus didn't say anything. He just opened his arms, and Elena walked into them. She cried against his chest, her body shaking with grief, while Daniel slept peacefully in his blanket. They stood like that for a long time, in the quiet hallway of the hospice, while the world went on around them. The funeral was 3 days later. It was a small affair, just Elena, Marcus, and a few of Rosa's friends from the neighborhood where she'd lived. They gathered in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Phoenix, under a bright blue sky. Elena spoke about her mother, about her mistakes and her redemption, about the years of estrangement and the joy of reconciliation. About the way Rosa's face had lit up when she held Daniel for the first time. "She wasn't perfect," Elena said, "but she loved me, and in the end, that's what mattered." After the service, Elena and Marcus walked among the gravestones, Daniel sleeping in a carrier against Elena's chest. "What are you going to do now?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. I can't go back to Oklahoma City. There's nothing for me there, but I don't have anywhere else to go." Marcus had been thinking about this for days, turning it over in his mind. "Come to Memphis." Elena looked at him, startled. "What? Come to Memphis? It's where I'm from, where my daughter lives. There are resources there, programs to help young mothers get on their feet, and you'd have people who care about you." "Marcus, I couldn't impose like that. It's not imposing. It's called being part of a family." Elena's eyes filled with tears again. "Family? I know we just met." I know this whole situation is strange, but I promised your mother I would take care of you, and I meant it. Let me help you, Elena. Let me be the person I should have been all along." She didn't answer right away. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the desert wind rustling the leaves of the sparse trees. Finally, Elena said, "Okay. Okay? Okay. I'll come to Memphis, but I'm paying you back, Marcus, every cent. Once I get a job, once I'm on my feet. We'll see about that." They drove to Memphis the next week, taking their time, stopping at truck stops and diners along the way. Daniel grew stronger every day, his little lungs getting louder, his tiny fingers gripping whatever they could find. Marcus called Jessica and told her he was bringing guests. She was surprised but welcoming. "I can't wait to meet them, Dad, and I can't wait to see you." "I can't wait either, sweetheart." They arrived in Memphis on a sunny afternoon in early December. Jessica was waiting for them outside her house, her 2 kids bouncing with excitement beside her. "Grandpa!" they shouted, running to Marcus as he climbed out of the truck. He knelt down and hugged them both, feeling their small arms wrap around his neck. He'd missed so much of their lives, so many moments like this. "I'm here now," he said quietly. "I'm here." Eleanor stood off to the side, looking uncertain. But Jessica walked over to her with a warm smile. "You must be Eleanor. Dad's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope. The best, and this must be Daniel." Jessica peered into the carrier at the sleeping baby. "Oh, he's beautiful. Can I hold him?" "Of course." Jessica cradled Daniel in her arms, cooing softly. Her kids gathered around, wanting to see the baby. "Kids, meet your new cousin," Jessica said. Elena's eyes widened. "Cousin? That's what family means," Jessica said. "You're part of this family now, both of you." That night, they all gathered around Jessica's dining room table for dinner. It was a chaotic, noisy affair, with kids running around and food being passed and conversations overlapping. Marcus sat at the head of the table, watching it all with a kind of wonder. This was what he'd been missing all those years on the road, this warmth, this connection, this sense of belonging. Jessica's husband, Tom, raised a glass. "To Marcus," he said, "for finally coming home." "To Marcus," everyone echoed. Marcus raised his own glass. "And to second chances. May we all be wise enough to take them." After dinner, Marcus stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool and the stars were just beginning to appear. He sat down on the porch swing and let out a long breath. The door opened behind him and Elena came out. She sat down beside him, Daniel sleeping in her arms. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she said. "Just thinking about how strange life is. A week ago, I was alone in a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. Now I'm here, surrounded by family. Do you regret it? Not for a second, do you?" Elena shook her head. "No, I miss my mother. I'll always miss her. But she died happy, Marcus. She died knowing that her grandson would be loved and cared for. That's more than she ever expected. She was a remarkable woman. She was. And so are you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars multiply across the sky. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now? Now we take things one day at a time. I'm going to look for work here in Memphis, something that keeps me closer to home, and you're going to focus on Daniel, on building a life for both of you." It sounds so simple when you say it. It's not simple. It's going to be hard. There will be days when you want to give up, when it all feels impossible. But that's when you lean on the people around you. That's what family is for. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. Thank me by living a good life. That's all I ask." Christmas came a few weeks later. The house was decorated with lights and garlands, and a tree stood in the corner of the living room, covered in ornaments that had been collected over generations. Marcus helped the kids hang their stockings and told them stories about Christmas when he was a boy. He'd never done this before, never been around for the holidays. And now he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. On Christmas Eve, after the kids had gone to bed, Marcus sat with Jessica in front of the fire. "Dad," Jessica said, "I want to thank you for coming back, for staying." "You don't have to thank me, Jess. I should have been here all along." "I know. But you're here now. That's what matters." She reached out and took his hand. "Mom would have been happy to see you like this. She always believed you had it in you, even when I didn't." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when she died. I'm sorry I wasn't there for a lot of things." "You can't change the past, Dad. You can only change what you do from now on." "I know, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making up for it." On Christmas morning, the house exploded with noise and excitement. Kids tearing open presents, wrapping paper flying everywhere, shouts of joy filling the air. Marcus sat in his chair and watched it all, a smile on his face. Elena was there too, holding Daniel, who was now almost a month old and starting to notice the world around him. Tom put a present in Marcus's hands. "This one's for you, from all of us." Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of the whole family, taken just a few days ago. Jessica and Tom, the kids, Eleanor and Daniel, and Marcus himself in the center of it all. "It's perfect," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "We wanted you to have something to remember this by," Jessica said. "Your first real Christmas with us." "The first of many," Marcus said. He looked around the room at the faces of the people he loved. His daughter, his grandchildren, his new extended family, all of them together, connected by bonds stronger than blood. This was what he'd been searching for all those years on the road, he realized. Not freedom or adventure or the romance of the open highway, just this, connection, belonging, home. And it had taken a chance encounter at a truck stop, a young woman with a newborn baby, and a dying woman's last wish to show him the way. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first snow of the winter. It covered the ground in a blanket of white, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. Marcus watched the snowflakes drift past the window and thought about Rosa. He hoped she was at peace, wherever she was. He hoped she could see what her daughter had become, what her grandson would become. And he hoped she knew that her last wish had been granted, not just the wish to hold her grandson, but the deeper wish she'd spoken to Marcus in her final hours. The wish for Elena to have a family, to have people who would love her and support her and never let her face the world alone. Marcus had been given a second chance, and he hadn't wasted it. He'd found his way home at last. The months that followed were filled with challenges and triumphs. Elena found a job at a local bakery, working the early morning shift so she could spend afternoons with Daniel. She was a natural in the kitchen, remembering the recipes her mother had taught her as a child. Marcus found work too, not as a long-haul trucker, but as a local delivery driver. The pay was less, but the hours were regular, and he was home every night for dinner. He became a fixture in Jessica's life, picking up the kids from school, helping with homework, being there for all the moments he'd missed before. The kids adored him, and he adored them right back. Elena and Jessica became close friends, bonded by motherhood and shared experiences. They had coffee together in the mornings before work, and their children played together in the afternoons. Daniel grew from a tiny newborn into a curious, active baby. He had Elena's dark hair and Rosa's bright eyes and a smile that could light up a room. On the first anniversary of Rosa's death, Elena and Marcus drove to Phoenix to visit her grave. They brought flowers and photos of Daniel, now a year old and walking on unsteady legs. "She would have been so proud of you," Marcus said as they stood by the gravestone. She would have been proud of both of us, Elena replied. They stayed for an hour, talking to Rosa about everything that had happened over the past year, the small victories and the hard days, the growth and the healing, the way their strange little family had come together and stayed together. On the drive back to Memphis, Elena turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the future. About Daniel's future, specifically." "What about it?" Elena took a deep breath. "Daniel doesn't have a father. Not a real one, anyway. And I've been thinking about how important it is for a child to have a male role model in their life." Marcus waited, sensing that she was building toward something. "You've been more of a father to him than anyone else could have been," Elena continued. "You've been there since the beginning, since the night we met. And I was wondering, I wanted to ask—" She stopped, struggling to find the words. "Ask me what?" Marcus said gently. "Would you be his grandfather? Officially, not just in spirit, but really, truly his grandfather." Marcus pulled the truck over to the side of the road. He turned to Elena with tears in his eyes. "I would be honored," he said, "more honored than you could ever know." They hugged, right there on the side of the highway, with Daniel babbling happily in his car seat behind them. When they got back to Memphis, Marcus called a family meeting. Everyone gathered in Jessica's living room, curious about what he had to say. "I have an announcement," Marcus said. "As of today, Daniel officially has a grandfather, me." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Jessica hugged him, and her kids jumped up and down with excitement. "Does this mean Daniel is our cousin for real now?" one of them asked. "It means he's family," Marcus said, "and that's what matters." From that day on, Marcus threw himself into the role of grandfather with everything he had. He taught Daniel how to walk, how to talk, how to throw a ball. He read him bedtime stories and sang him lullabies and held him when he cried. He was the grandfather he never thought he'd be. The father he'd failed to be for Jessica, the man he'd always had the potential to become. Years passed. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy with a love of trucks and a fascination with the open road. Marcus told him stories about his days as a long-haul trucker, about the places he'd been and the things he'd seen. "Will you take me on the road someday, Grandpa?" Daniel asked. "Maybe when you're older," Marcus said. "But for now, let's focus on being here, together." Elena eventually met someone, a kind man named David who worked as a teacher at the local high school. He was patient and gentle, and he loved Daniel as if he were his own son. Marcus was skeptical at first, protective of Elena and Daniel in a way that surprised even him, but over time he came to see that David was a good man, the kind of man who would be there for the long haul. They got married in a small ceremony in Jessica's backyard. Daniel was the ring-bearer, carefully carrying the pillow down the aisle with an expression of intense concentration. Marcus walked Elena down the aisle, giving her away as if he were her own father. And in a way, he was. "Take care of her," he whispered to David as he handed her off. "I will, sir, I promise." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Marcus's health began to decline, the toll of decades on the road finally catching up with him. But he faced his limitations with grace, adapting to a slower pace of life without complaint. He was there when Daniel started school, there when he won his first spelling bee, there when he scored his first goal in soccer. He was there for all the moments that mattered, making up for lost time in the best way he knew how. On his 70th birthday, Marcus's family threw him a party. Everyone was there, Jessica and Tom, their kids who were now teenagers, Elena and David and Daniel, and a handful of old friends from his trucking days. They gathered around him in Jessica's living room, which had been decorated with balloons and streamers and a banner that read, "Happy 70th Grandpa." Daniel, now 9 years old, climbed onto Marcus's lap and handed him a homemade card. "I made this for you, Grandpa," he said. Marcus opened the card and felt his heart swell. Inside was a drawing of a big red truck with 2 figures standing beside it. One was a tall man with grey hair, the other a small boy with dark hair. Underneath, in careful, childlike handwriting, Daniel had written, "Thank you for always being there for me. I love you, Grandpa." Marcus pulled the boy close and held him tight. "I love you too, Daniel, more than you'll ever know." Later that night, after the party had wound down and the guests had gone home, Marcus sat on the porch with Jessica. The night air was warm, and fireflies flickered in the darkness. "Dad," Jessica said, "can I tell you something?" "Of course. I used to be so angry at you, for all the years you were gone, for all the things you missed. I thought I would never forgive you." Marcus nodded slowly. "I don't blame you. I was a terrible father." "You were, but you're not anymore these past 10 years. You've been the father I always wanted, the grandfather my kids needed, and I want you to know that I forgive you, completely and totally." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to stop them. "Thank you, Jess. That means more to me than anything." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for coming home, Dad. Thank you for staying." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies dance. Marcus thought about his life, about all the roads he'd traveled and all the miles he'd logged. He thought about the choices he'd made, both good and bad. He thought about Linda, about Rosa, about all the people who had touched his life in one way or another, and he thought about that rainy night at the truck stop when a young woman with a baby had changed everything. He'd been driving through life for 53 years, always moving, never stopping, and then, in one moment of grace, he'd found something worth staying for. Home wasn't a place, he realized. It was people. It was the connections you made, and the love you shared, and the family you built, whether by blood or by choice. He'd found his home at last, and he would never leave it again. 5 more years passed. Marcus was 75 now, his body worn down by age and years of hard living. He moved slowly, his joints aching, his heart weakened by decades of neglect, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He spent his days surrounded by family, watching his grandchildren grow, playing with Daniel, who was now 14 and nearly as tall as Marcus had been at his age. On a warm spring afternoon, Marcus sat in his favorite chair on Jessica's porch, watching Daniel practice his driving in the driveway. The boy had gotten his learner's permit just a few weeks ago, and he was determined to master the skill. "Easy on the brakes," Marcus called out. "Don't jerk them, just press smoothly." Daniel waved to acknowledge the advice, then promptly hit the brakes too hard, lurching forward in his seat. Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "He'll get it," he muttered to himself. "Took me a while, too." Eleanor came out onto the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to Marcus and sat down beside him. "He's doing well, isn't he?" she said, watching her son. "He's a natural, got his mama's determination." Elena smiled, "and his grandpa's stubbornness." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their lemonade and watching Daniel practice. "Can I ask you something, Marcus?" Eleanor said after a while. "Always. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in all those years ago? Changing your whole life for a stranger?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not for a second," he said. "That night at the truck stop was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Daniel, you gave me a reason to be better, to do better. But you gave up so much. Your career, your independence. I gave up nothing that mattered, and I gained everything that does." Elena reached over and took his hand. "I don't know what would have happened to us if you hadn't been there that night. I think about it sometimes. where we would have ended up. Doesn't matter where you would have ended up. What matters is where you are now, happy, healthy, surrounded by people who love you. Because of you. Because of all of us. Together. Daniel parked the car and came bounding up to the porch, a huge grin on his face. "Did you see that, Grandpa? I did a perfect three-point turn." "I saw it. Well done, son." Daniel plopped down on the steps, still buzzing with excitement. "When I get my license, can we take a road trip? Just you and me?" Marcus looked at Elena, who nodded with a smile. "I'd like that," Marcus said. "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know. Somewhere far. Like you used to do when you were a trucker." Marcus thought about all the miles he'd driven, all the places he'd seen. The mountains and the deserts, the forests and the plains, the endless ribbon of highway stretching out before him. "How about the Grand Canyon?" he said. "It's been 30 years since I was there last. Always wanted to go back." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Really? That would be amazing." "It's a date then. Soon as you get your license, we'll hit the road." That summer, true to his word, Marcus and Daniel set off on their road trip. They rented a comfortable RV, big enough for the two of them with room to spare. Eleanor and Jessica both fussed over them as they prepared to leave, packing enough food and supplies to last a month. "Be careful," Eleanor said, hugging her son tight. "Call me every day." "Mom, I'll be fine. Grandpa's with me." "That's what I'm worried about," Eleanor teased, but her eyes were soft with love. Marcus hugged Jessica, then Eleanor. "We'll be back in 2 weeks. Try not to worry too much." "Fat chance," Jessica said. "Drive safe, Dad." They pulled out of the driveway and hit the open road. Daniel was at the wheel, nervous but excited, while Marcus sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar landscape roll by. "You know," Marcus said, "I must have driven this highway 1,000 times, but it's different, seeing it with you." "Different how?" "Better, more meaningful, like I'm finally seeing it for the first time." They drove for hours, stopping at roadside diners and scenic overlooks. Marcus told Daniel stories about his trucking days, about the characters he'd met and the adventures he'd had. "Did you ever get lonely?" Daniel asked. "Being on the road all the time?" "Sometimes. But I was running away from things back then, using the road as an escape. It wasn't until I met your mother that I realized what I was missing." "Tell me that story again, about how you met Mom at the truck stop." Marcus smiled. It was a rainy night in November. He told the story again for what must have been the 100th time, but it never got old, never lost its power. It was the story of how his life had changed, how he had been redeemed by an act of simple kindness. They reached the Grand Canyon on the 3rd day. They parked the RV and walked to the rim, standing side by side as the vast expanse spread out before them. The canyon was even more magnificent than Marcus remembered. Layer upon layer of red and orange rock, carved by millions of years of water and wind. The Colorado River wound through the bottom, a thin ribbon of blue in the distant depths. "Wow," Daniel breathed. "It's incredible." "It is. I remember the first time I saw it. I was about your age, actually. My father brought me here on a trip, just the two of us." "Your dad was a trucker too, right?" "Yeah, 3rd generation. The road was in our blood. Do you think it's in my blood too?" Marcus looked at the boy, this child who had become his grandson, his family, his redemption. "I think," he said slowly, "that you have the freedom to choose your own path. The road will always be there if you want it. But so will home. So will family. The important thing is to find a balance. Like you did, eventually. It took me a long time to figure it out, longer than it should have. But yes, like I did." They stood there for a long time, watching the shadows shift across the canyon as the sun moved across the sky. "Grandpa," Daniel said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you scared? Of dying, I mean." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. It was a heavy question for a 14-year-old to ask, but Daniel had always been mature beyond his years. "I used to be," Marcus said. "When I was younger, when I didn't have anything to anchor me. The thought of dying alone, without anyone to miss me, that was terrifying. And now, no, I'm not scared anymore. I've lived a good life. Not always, but in the end. I've got people who love me, and I've left something behind that matters. That's more than a lot of people can say." Daniel nodded slowly, processing this. "I don't want you to die," he said quietly. "Nobody does. But it's part of life, son. The important thing is to make the most of the time we have, to love the people we're with, to be present, to not take anything for granted." "Is that why you wanted to take this trip?" Marcus smiled. "Partly. And partly because I wanted to share this with you, this place, this experience, something for you to remember when I'm gone." Daniel turned to face him, his eyes glistening. "I'll remember everything, Grandpa. Every story you've told me, every lesson you've taught me. I'll remember it all." Marcus pulled the boy into a hug, holding him tight against the backdrop of the ancient canyon. "I know you will," he said, "and that's enough. That's more than enough." They spent another week on the road, exploring national parks and small towns, eating at diners and sleeping under the stars. It was the best trip of Marcus's life, better even than all those decades on the highway. Because this time, he wasn't running away from anything. He was running toward something. Toward connection, toward memory, toward the things that truly mattered. When they finally returned home, Elena and Jessica were waiting on the porch, their faces bright with relief and joy. "Welcome back," Jessica called. "How was it?" "Perfect," Marcus said. "Absolutely perfect." That night, the whole family gathered for dinner. Marcus sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the people he loved. He looked around at their faces, Jessica and Tom, Elena and David, the grandchildren who had grown so much, and Daniel, his unofficial grandson, who had become the center of his world. "I want to say something," Marcus said, raising his glass. The table fell silent, all eyes on him. 15 years ago, I was alone. I was driving a truck across the country, running away from my life, from my mistakes. I thought I had nothing to live for, no one who needed me. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And then I stopped at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere, and I met a young woman with a baby, a woman who was trying to get to her dying mother, and everything changed. He looked at Eleanor, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "I didn't save you that night, Eleanor. You saved me. You gave me a reason to be better, to do better. You gave me a family." He raised his glass higher. "So here's to family, to second chances. To the people who show up for us when we need them most, and to the love that binds us together across miles and years and all the obstacles life throws in our path." "To family," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As they drank, Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't the alcohol, it was something deeper. It was gratitude, pure and simple. Gratitude for the life he'd been given, for the redemption he'd found, for the love that surrounded him. He was 75 years old. He'd driven more miles than he could count, seen more sunrises and sunsets than most people would see in a dozen lifetimes. And in the end, the journey had led him here, to this table, to these people, to this moment. It had been a long road, but he wouldn't have changed a single mile of it. The seasons changed, as they always do. Summer faded into fall, fall into winter. Marcus's health continued to decline, slowly. He spent more time in his chair on the porch, watching the world go by, content to be still. Daniel visited every day after school, doing his homework at the kitchen table, while Marcus dozed nearby. They didn't always talk much, but the companionship was enough. One afternoon in late November, exactly 15 years after that fateful night at the truck stop, Marcus called Daniel over to his chair. "I want to tell you something," he said. "What is it, Grandpa?" "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've grown into a fine young man, kind, hard-working, thoughtful, everything I wish I'd been at your age." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Grandpa, let me finish. Whatever happens in your life, whatever roads you travel, I want you to remember one thing. Love is the only thing that matters. Not money, not success, not how many miles you drive or how many places you see. Love. The people you love and the people who love you. That's what makes a life worth living." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "And one more thing," Marcus said. "Never pass up a chance to help someone. You never know when a stranger in need might turn out to be family." He smiled, thinking of Eleanor, of that rainy night that had changed everything. "I'll remember, Grandpa, I promise." "I know you will. That's what gives me peace." 3 weeks later, on a quiet December evening, Marcus Johnson passed away in his sleep. He was surrounded by his family, everyone he loved gathered around his bed. Jessica held one hand, Elena the other. Daniel sat at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down his face, but his heart full of love and gratitude. Marcus's last words, whispered just before he drifted off for the final time, were, "Thank you for everything." The funeral was held on a bright, cold winter day. The church was packed with people, truckers who had known Marcus from his years on the road, neighbors who had come to know him in his later years, and, of course, his family. Daniel spoke at the service, his voice steady despite his grief. "My grandfather used to say that life is a long road, full of twists and turns and unexpected detours. He drove that road for 75 years, and not all of it was easy. He made mistakes, he lost his way, but in the end, he found his way back." He paused, looking out at the congregation. 15 years ago, my mom was a stranger at a truck stop, trying to get to her dying mother. She had no money, no way to get there, no hope. And then a trucker named Marcus Johnson decided to help her. Not because he had to, not because there was anything in it for him, but because it was the right thing to do. His voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. That act of kindness changed everything. It changed my mom's life and mine. It gave us a family when we had none. It gave us love when we were alone. He looked at Elena, who was crying quietly in the front row. My grandfather spent 30 years running away from his life, and then he spent 15 years making up for it. He was the best man I ever knew, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to his example. After the service, the family gathered at Jessica's house. They shared stories and memories, laughter and tears. They celebrated a life well lived, a man who had found redemption in the most unexpected of places. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Eleanor found herself alone on the porch, looking up at the stars. Daniel came out and sat beside her. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different our lives would have been if Grandpa hadn't stopped for us that night. I was so desperate, so hopeless, and he just appeared like an angel or something." "He wasn't an angel. He was just a man who made a choice." Elena smiled sadly. "The best kind of man. The kind who chooses to do the right thing, even when it's hard." They sat in silence for a while, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Do you believe in fate, Mom?" Daniel asked. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's not fate exactly. Maybe it's just grace. Moments when the universe gives us exactly what we need, if we're paying attention. Like Grandpa stopping for us. Like Grandpa stopping for us." Daniel leaned his head against her shoulder. "I miss him already. Me too, baby, me too." Above them, the stars glittered in the cold night sky. The same stars that had watched over Marcus on all those nights behind the wheel. The same stars that had witnessed his transformation from a lonely trucker to a beloved grandfather. And somewhere out there, on the endless highways and the quiet roads, his spirit drove on. Not running away anymore, but simply traveling, free at last. Years later, Daniel would become a doctor. He would specialize in hospice care, helping people face the end of their lives with dignity and grace. When people asked him why he chose that path, he would tell them about his grandmother Rosa, whom he never met, and about his grandfather Marcus, who taught him that love was the only thing that mattered. Elena would write a book about her journey, about the night at the truck stop and everything that followed. It became a bestseller, touching millions of people with its message of hope and redemption. Jessica would keep Marcus's memory alive through her children and grandchildren, passing down his stories and his wisdom. The photo he'd kept on his dashboard, the one of her as a little girl at the county fair, would hang in her living room for the rest of her life. And every year, on the anniversary of that rainy November night, the family would gather together to remember. They would share stories about Marcus, about Rosa, about the strange and beautiful way their lives had intertwined. They would talk about second chances and unexpected blessings, about the power of kindness and the importance of showing up for the people who need us. And they would raise a glass to the trucker who had changed everything. The man who had spent 30 years running away, only to discover that home had been waiting for him all along. In the end, that was Marcus Johnson's greatest delivery. Not the loads he hauled or the miles he logged, but the love he carried, the family he built, and the legacy he left behind. A legacy that would travel on, mile after mile, generation after generation, finding its way home.